Welcome back to this week's episode of the Rock and Roll Ghost podcast. This week we have Glenfiddich brand ambassador and whiskey expert Kevin Canchola, who's here today talking about Glenfiddich's Grand Couronne, or however you pronounce it. We were just discussing that. It's a 26-year-old whiskey that's from what I'm reading here, matured in American and European oak casks at the Glenfiddich Distillery in Dufftown, Scotland. So, Kevin, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Brett. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here and talk about whiskey.
No problem. Where are you at today?
I'm born and raised and based out of Chicago.
Okay, so you're in Chicago today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, excellent. Yeah, I noticed you had a lot of Chicago places in your past, and then you worked for some place in Miami for a bit before joining Glenfiddich. What drove you first to work with Glenfiddich? What was the opportunity that arose, and what drove you to take the job?
Man, Brett, those are two different stories. I mean, being a brand ambassador is kind of like being a storyteller at the same time. So I hope I don't bore anyone. But it all started about, I'd say about 8 years ago. I was working at a whiskey bar in Chicago that no longer exists. It was a terrific whiskey bar. We were sought after by every top whiskey, American, Scottish, or otherwise, to be on our back bar. So we had tastings all the time. And I went into a tasting one day, and in fact, one of the bottles behind me, the Glenfiddich 12, was brought to us for a tasting, and I enjoyed Scotch.
I'm sorry, Kevin. I apologize. And then,
sure.
Hold on one second. Just check something. So you cut out when you started talking about working at the whiskey bar. I apologize if we can. Yeah, you just froze. So
sorry about that.
No. It could be on my end. I'm not sure. So just in case we lost anything, if you could just kind of go over.
Yeah, no problem.
You got the whiskey bar, and it was much sought after.
So yeah, about 8 years ago, I was working at a top whiskey bar in Chicago, and we had tastings all the time. And one of the tastings that I attended had the Glenfiddich 12. And I enjoyed Scotch at the time, not as much as I do today, but I was more of an American whiskey drinker. And one thing about single malts that I found and that I looked for actually is in a lot of the sherry influenced whiskeys, meaning a lot of single malt Scotch spends time in Spanish oak that previously held sherry. Most of the time there's some at least subtle unpleasantries. It's either on the aroma or on the flavor, and a lot of Scotch drinkers just power through it because there's too many good flavors in there as well. And in fact, the guy who writes the Whiskey Bible every year, Jim Murray, talks about he has his heavily sherry influenced whiskeys right before lunch so he can cleanse his palate right after. So I always look for, what I just want to explore the whiskey. And when I tasted Glenfiddich 12, it was a light bulb moment for me. It was the first, sherry influenced whiskey or Spanish oak influenced whiskey that had zero negative aspects to it. I enjoyed the dram from beginning to end, and that always stuck with me. To fast forward a bit to, I want to say it was 2019. As you said, I was living in Miami and working for another single malt Scotch. Had no idea what we were getting into. Had no idea there was a pandemic around the corner, but I had a girlfriend who had missed her family back home. She wanted to be closer to home, and she was looking for jobs. And a friend had told me, they said, Glenfiddich may be looking for an ambassador in Chicago and Miami. So I applied openly to both. I love Miami. Miami's a beautiful city and great time, but there's no place quite like home. So it felt to me like a bit of a happenstance. Here's a brand that has sat well with you for almost 10 years that you've loved, and they're giving you an opportunity to move home and represent them. And I jumped. I literally jumped at the opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. And what is it? What can you tell us about what a brand ambassador actually does?
Brett, I get this question all the time at whiskey fests, at events. How do I get your job? How do I get your job? It's quite simple. Just have a background in spirits for at least 10 years. And that can be many things. That could be bartending, that could be on the marketing side, that could be in distribution, but you got to have knowledge with it. You should study spirits at some point. If you take a look at my coffee table right now, I got about 6 books on whiskey, and I've read through them all, but there's still points of reference for me. So the education is important. Okay. And definitely be able to entertain. I'm constantly out and about, whether I'm in front of bartenders or consumers, or people of the media, people like yourself. We're constantly having these conversations, and I like to say preaching the whiskey gospel. My Instagram handle is the Whiskey Cleric for a reason, because I feel like ambassadors are, much like clerics. We preach the whiskey gospel. We're shedding light on things that people don't really know about, to be honest.
Right. Just
sharing that information.
Okay. So, and part of your responsibility is I'm gathering, traveling the world.
Yeah. Although that's this past year and a half or so, right, that's been a bit tougher. But yeah, that's another huge thing that I enjoy. You meet people from all over the world, and when I was living in Miami, coming back to the Midwest was always a priority for me, and I didn't care what state it was. Mm-hmm. Granted, I'm a hockey guy through and through, so there are some rivalries between us and some other local Midwestern states, but I jumped at the opportunity to come back to the Midwest at any point. So I always loved that. I travel the West Coast a bit. Obviously, we go to Scotland, which is just an absolute beautiful, beautiful country. But yeah, we travel quite a bit.
So you've been to Scotland. I have to ask, have you had haggis?
Yes. And, I'm a guy like, when in Rome, that's kind of how I look at it. Like, I won't even think twice. If this is what they do there, let me try this, let me do it. And I love haggis. I love it so much. Yeah. I love everything they eat over in Scotland. They have, we joke about some of the things they have. They have like a prawn cocktail form of chips. Or crisps is what they call them.
Oh, they call them really? Yeah. I didn't know there was a difference in Scotland. Okay.
I think it's a more UK as a whole, but they prefer the term crisps.
So are we talking chip like actual potato chips would be?
Crisps?
Yes. Okay, yes. I think because to them fries are chips. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a whole changing of the lingo.
Now I got you. Yeah. Okay. I had to ask that because it's like, it's something you're never going to see here unless somebody sneaks in and makes it for you, because most of it's not allowed to be sold or anything in the country. So, well, tell me a little bit about Glenfiddich. What I know that it's been around since the 1880s. 1887 specifically is when I saw that the stills first ran. It's 5 generations now. It's still owned by the family, which is quite amazing considering. What is it like to work with something with roots that deep?
It's being a Midwesterner again. I always go back to my roots, of course, but that was a huge point for me. We're family owned. Being a good old fashioned humble Midwesterner, I think we believe in stuff like that. Those are the products that you want to associate yourself with. Somebody who's family owned, 5 generations, same family name on the back of the bottle since 1887, as you said. And it's a really great story. When you join the company, they give you a book, The Life and Times of William Grant and Sons. And as romantic as it is, it's a true story. He built that distillery by hand with his 7 sons, 2 daughters, 1 mason and a wife. You can't make that stuff up, and I'm drawn to stuff like that. I love it.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Do you feel any, pressure living up to being the ambassador for a company that's so historic at this point in the spirits game? It must be both a sense of pride and an enormous responsibility to live up to being able to tell the company's tale and sell its wares throughout your run. What does that feel like to you as being the spokesperson, I guess, essentially for the brand?
Yeah, Brett, you nailed it again. I guess there is pressure. I don't tend to think about that aspect.
Right.
In fact, I try not to, but there's also an enormous sense of pride. I mean, we are the chosen few. There's currently 3 ambassadors in the United States right now, and we are the ones that are chosen to go out there. And again, we preach that whiskey gospel, but we're doing it for Glenfiddich. We're doing it for William Grant, who started this brand with his family.
Yeah.
Who knows if he knew it would have lasted as long as it has, and still being a top whiskey in the world as we are right now. But there's an enormous sense of pride. But I will tell you, you always leave a whiskey tasting saying, oh, I wish I would have mentioned that one thing or would have
Yeah.
added this. But you leave every whiskey tasting and every event having given your all, and people thank you for it constantly, and you're doing a great job. So there's definitely an enormous sense of pride.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I noticed that from everything I've read, it's the best selling single malt whiskey in the world. And it has cornered kind of the market with it. I think the figure I saw was like something like 35% of the market, which is pretty astounding considering especially the last 20 years, everyone's gotten into the spirit game.
Yeah,
From celebrities, if you're talking like George Clooney and P. Diddy getting into it, their own thing, they're different things which have nothing to do with whiskey, but still, it's just like everybody wants to get in this right now. Everybody's got something to sell, and to still uh, be that top dog is pretty impressive, and it's also one of the most awarded. Correct?
yeah, we are the world's most awarded single malt. We have been for some time, and you're right. Everybody wants a piece of this right now. Everybody wants to get into the spirits game. So to be able to carry that forward is a great honor for sure.
Yeah. What do you think accounts for the last 20 years or so? It seems like the younger generation has. I think you're beginning to notice like articles come up about the younger generation, I guess, and the excesses of drinking, which obviously I'm sure Glenfiddich, espouses responsible drinking,
Definitely.
but what do you make of the fact that, it's a generational thing almost, it seems, where spirits have become this thing. You talk, you think back to the invention of like bottle service becoming a big thing, and granted, again, that's not necessarily related to you, but it's just drinking in general has become more upscale or sellable than it was perhaps before the turn of the century.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, and we're on a constant wheel here, right? Like history continues to repeat itself. So we've seen that there was a Scotch boom in the 90s, and I think we're seeing the resurgence again right now as far as trends go. But more to what you were saying about the generation, and it's kind of a hard part for me to accept that now that you brought that up, Brett. There's generations younger than me that are drinking now that I have to, figure out and associate with and find out what they're drinking. But Glenfiddich particularly we just finished a really awesome study, and we're studying millennial drinkers and what they like to drink versus what people drank 10 years ago. And this study, we pride ourselves on being a luxury single malt. Mm-hmm. Which is a newer identity for us, to be honest. So we're venturing into the luxury. Well, we have always had, older whiskeys and luxury whiskeys, but we are now making that a staple of what we do. So we are finding out, what makes a luxury whiskey and what consumers think luxury is. And the main study that we were looking after shows that most consumers, when you ask them what luxury is pertaining to like their grand idea of it, it comes off as very differently than what they think luxury is within their own realm and their own life. So people have two concepts of luxury. And I think that's quite interesting. So we're only going to build on that. And the way that I carry that in my day to day is, luxury doesn't have to be, fine dining, white tablecloth, the thought you have in your head. It's how do we bring luxury to you? And again, with millennial drinkers, what they're doing now that, maybe Brett, if we're in a similar generation, I think we are, what we didn't do is they would rather spend more money, on something that's higher end. Right. And drink less of it at one time, than spend a lot of money on a lower quality. So quality is being sought after by the millennial drinker, and that's what we're providing, I'd say.
Yeah, I think you've got a pretty good point there. I think the rise of the internet, and smartphones and being able to access information, and also, in my mind, Scotch used to be, Scotch whiskey used to be a thing, an older, person thing. You'd see somebody a little bit more of a professional nature leaning towards, a more I guess, special Scotch, as opposed to perhaps like the stuff you can get for a lot cheaper. That's just to get you plowed, I guess, essentially. But there was always been a sense of refinement with Scotch and with Glenfiddich, in especially. So you're kind of in an interesting age where you're still selling that upper level, that higher end clientele, but also by saying that, a younger generation is sitting there saying, well, yeah, I may only have one, but I may go and spend whatever the hell, a pour of the high end of Glenfiddich, would be in a bar, which, obviously bars will, compared to what a bottle costs, you can buy on your own, a bar will upsell that significantly because that's where a restaurant or a bar, that's where they make their money.
100%.
Yeah, especially if you have something rare. And okay, so I'm leading up to Grand Couronne. I do want to ask for the rather, I guess, I don't want to say ignorant, but the rather pedestrian person, just tell us what single malt, whiskey is, as I guess as succinctly as you possibly could.
Sure. The easiest way to define it is by its name. You start off with the word single, meaning, which is very confusing for most people, but single simply means all the liquid in the bottle comes from one single distillery. With the American whiskey terms like single cask and single barrel and things like that, people tend to get confused. But with single malt Scotch, single means one distillery. Malt is another step in the process that most American whiskey makers do not do. Bourbon and rye don't get malted. There's now an American single malt that gets malted, so I got to mention that for sure. So we have malted barley. All of our single malt Scotch comes from barley. It has to come from barley, and it has to come from malted barley, which is another step in the process. And then Scotch simply means it's got to be made with ingredients from Scotland. Outside of the oak that comes from, we get European oak or American oak, but everything else, all ingredients, water source, barley, the distillation has to take place, the maturation has to take place, all in Scotland.
Mm-hmm. So Scotch is basically meaning it's a term for where it's produced more than anything. The whiskey is what it actually is, but Scotch whiskey means where it's from.
100%. And in fact, depending on who I'm talking to, I love to just call it whiskey.
Right.
I'm a whiskey drinker, but it can get confusing. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I'm not much of a drinker. And your folks were kind enough to send me a few little samples of stuff, and I haven't had them yet because I'm not much of a drinker. But I do plan on. I'm doing a nice dinner soon, and I plan on kind of sneaking those in to have with it because what the hell. But okay. So with regards to Grand Couronne. Mm-hmm. Tell me what that's what you're mostly here to talk about. Why is this so special, and what makes it special?
So the Grand Couronne is the literal crowning jewel of the Glenfiddich Grand Series, which began, and I believe we sent you the sample as well. It started in 2001 with our Grand Reserva, which is a 21-year-old single malt that's been finished in American oak that held 4-year-old Caribbean rum. So it started with the Grand Reserva in 2001. Now, 20 years later, we've completed the Grand Series. And when you think about that in general, 20 years of a project, which started before that, because obviously you have to mature whiskey for a certain amount of time. This has been a very long and special process for our malt master, Brian Kinsman. And it started with the Grand Reserva, where we had, whiskey that's been finished in a Caribbean rum cask. And then we went on to the Grand Cru, the 23 year, which was just launched in 2019. And this whiskey is been matured for 23 years in American and European oak. And then it sees, I believe it's up to 6 months in French cuvee casks. If you want to talk about, a celebratory whiskey, that's definitely got to be in your list of top celebratory whiskeys right there. And now we finish it with a 26-year-old whiskey. So we have a combined total of 70 years of maturation here. And we finished that with our crowning jewel, the Grand Couronne, which was aged 26 years in American oak. And then we finished that for up to 2 years in cognac casks. And having worked with very closely with cognac for 5 years, this is a very special whiskey for many reasons, but the French oak involved in maturing and finishing this whiskey, French oak in general is very porous, very wide grained comparatively to American oak or other European oaks. So what it does is it aggressively attacks your spirit. Your spirit seeps into those wide pores of the oak and it pulls out oftentimes more oak than it should. So what makes Brian Kinsman such a talented whiskey maker, malt master, is the fact that he knows what we call in the industry the point of elegance, because there is such thing as over oak whiskeys. Our generation, Brett, I think we used to think it was the older the better, which isn't always the case. There's a point of elegance and there's a point of perfect maturation, and that's what you have here in the Grand Couronne.
Yeah. So basically, it's an idea that Brian Kinsman, I'm sorry, what was his title?
He's our malt master.
Malt master. Okay. He'll keep tabs on the taste of each run that they're doing to see where it's at, so that they can, they don't want it to go over and develop too much of that oak, is what you're saying, correct?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's a tough job and somebody's got to do it, but he's got to make sure. I don't know if he's tasting every day or every week, but he's definitely making sure that that whiskey sees just enough oak.
Right. So at the point where he feels like it's at the exact point is when, I guess, what happens when it's at that point where it's like it's ready to go? Do you then take the oak barrels and put it into another process? How does that win the bottle? You just go ahead and start bottling it.
Yeah, after maturation, there's most likely water added to the whiskey for bottling, and then we go ahead and bottle it. Another unique point about Glenfiddich is that at that point in the whiskey making process, the water that we use is the same water that we started with to make our whiskey, and that's water from the Robbie Dew Spring in Scotland, which is a natural spring that we are fortunate enough to have exclusive access to for Glenfiddich. That's
another thing about the history of it is building one place, staying in one place, not being bought out by another corporation that'll just throw whatever the hell in there and change the flavor of everything. You're keeping up everything that made the brand what it is by staying family owned and staying in one place.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the water source is always going to remain the same. The first two stills, which now we have close to 40, if I'm not mistaken, the first two stills were secondhand stills that were bought as a deal in the late 1800s from another distillery. And we use the exact same shape of those stills. Fun fact about those stills is that they're very short and squatty stills, commonly referred to as onion stills in the industry. And that other distillery was parting ways with those stills because they thought they couldn't get any floral or fruity flavors from those specific types of stills. And William Grant had the ingenuity and mindset to say, I know I can do that. And Glenfiddich today is known for our floral and fruity flavor from those same stills that we still use today.
It's pretty amazing. And how do you think he was able to do something with those that the other guys just said they couldn't do? I mean, how do you have any idea how that came about?
You know what? As far as distillation is concerned, and as much as I love whiskey, I still have to get my. I'm studying right now to get another certification that would give me more insight to answer that question.
No, that's fine. But it also you're also asking about. I'm asking a question that maybe. Granted, it's a long history passed down, and they probably have a lot of documentation. But the fact is that happened when the original guy did it too. So we're talking over 100-something years ago too. So
yeah.
the thinking process might not actually be all, you know, but then again, it might also be part of the legend too, that is written down. But I just figured I'd ask because it's just something that threw into my head. What are the company's hopes for Grand Couronne? What kind of output are they doing? Just tell me a little bit about what the actual product output is looking like right now.
Yeah, so as far as Grand Couronne is, again, the completion of the Grand Series. And these three whiskeys are very unique, and they're very tailored to, consumers enjoying them at different points of the night or different, events and things like that. Grand Reserva, in my opinion, is very much an escape whiskey or a vacation. It takes you to that place. Here in Chicago, we've got at least 2 solid months of just not so fun weather. And, I might reach for a Grand Reserva if I want to get away, if I want to have that escape. The Grand Cru is very much a celebration. We have, obviously, graduation, kids graduating from college and things like that. Grand Cru is a great celebration, a birthday, an event like that. And then the Grand Couronne, the crowning jewel, is the epitome of decadence and luxury. The way I like to picture it is, almost like what you said you might be doing, Brett, is like a very nice dinner party. When I picture Grand Couronne, honestly, and this is just a fantasy, but I picture like 16th century, girls and women in gowns and things like that. It's very decadent and luxurious whiskey, and it should be held in the highest regard at the best occasions.
So you'd say this is something that you would hold on to for very special occasions, in particular.
Me personally, Brett, I mean, right. I'm a
I guess,
kind of guy.
Right. And also, I mean, is that the intention that you're really selling this as a luxury item in this one in particular above the other ones that you did? This is the king of the grand run, basically.
100%. And it is that whiskey, and that is exactly how we're marketing it. This is that, again, I'll say it again, crowning jewel is the term we've come up with, and that's what this is. It's definitely for those events.
Gotcha. So what else is going on with Glenfiddich? I mean, is there something else on the horizon that you can tease? What other things might we want to know about Glenfiddich right now?
There's nothing that I think we can tease just yet on the horizon. Gotcha. I mean, this was something that was coming to fruition for 20 years. So this is our main focus for Glenfiddich right now. And in fact, it's something that this was being teased since I joined the company, a few years back. So this is something we've been waiting for. It's finally here. In fact, it's just here in Chicago this month. And, it's been launched in the U.S. officially as of August, but it should roll out in other states over the next month or two, hopefully. But this is what we're celebrating.
So basically for Grand Couronne right now, where can people mostly get it? Is it through the Glenfiddich website, or are there certain locations, say within Chicago?
Yeah, I mean, anything else during these crazy times, I'd say if you have a local liquor store, give them a call ahead of time to make sure. You never know, and I don't want anyone wasting a trip. But I definitely would recommend going to Drizzly for all Glenfiddich products, 100%. That's the easiest way to get any Glenfiddich products.
Okay, and it's Drizzly?
Drizzly, yeah, www.drizzly.com.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I think we covered the full gamut. Is there anything you feel like we're missing in our discussion?
I'd say no, not at all. It's been an absolute pleasure, Brett. I just say, to those out there who are going to purchase Glenfiddich, drink responsibly, enjoy the Grand Series, and yeah, just hope everybody enjoys it.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, Kevin, I really appreciate you taking the time today. It was a pleasure talking to you, and it was also a pleasure as somebody that's still considers themselves a novice in terms of drinking. It's always nice to learn something new, and I feel like I've learned a lot today about Scotch, and particularly about Glenfiddich and yourself. So thank you very much, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, Brett. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right. You have a good day.
You too. Cheers.
All right. Bye.